My name is Aila. I am the founder of Warrior Culture. I'm actually a life and business coach, so I run a couple of ventures, but Warrior Culture is one of them, where we empower our participants, usually men, to overcome family sexual violence and become leaders and advocates in the space of advocating against family sexual violence. Yeah, sure. It was founded in 2013 as a result of the national house cry. I don't know if many people will remember late Kapari Leniata was burnt alive in Hagen. And then there was a big national house cry at St. Sir John Gay Stadium here in Port Moresby. And everyone was focusing on men. And I guess how I look at it is, the way we talk about family sexual violence is Joe is beating up Mary today, for example. Then tomorrow we'll say Joe beat up Mary. And as time goes on, we'll say Mary got beat up by Joe. And then as time goes on even more, Mary's a battered woman. And so all the services are focused on Mary, which is good. She needs assistance. She's a victim. But who is Joe hurting to in 4 weeks' time or as time goes on? So basically the statistics say 2 out of 3 women will experience family sexual violence, which equates to, according to my rough calculations, 2.3 million women in Papua New Guinea. So I guess why we started was 2.3 million men in our minds needed assistance to empower themselves and to overcome family sexual violence so that they can stop perpetrating. That's the crux of why we started. I think fundamentally when you go into any GBV or family sexual violence training, at the center of any kind of violence is a desire to control another person or persons. Underlying that, which may not be talked about a lot, is why would someone try and control someone? It's because of fear. That's the emotion that's actually triggering off the desire to control. Because when you're scared, and most people, when we are faced with situations, whether they're relationships or external situations, where we feel we are unable to control that particular environment or circumstance, we resort to anything that we can to try and control it, whether it's verbal abuse or in some instances physical violence, if you aren't able to manage your mindset and emotions. So in my mind, underlying all kinds of violence, not just family sexual violence, are poor beliefs which trigger off this feeling of fear. And 3 responses to fear: fight, flight, or freeze. And physical violence is just the manifestation of the fight response when someone's feeling scared. It's a deeper conversation, but in a nutshell, that's what it is. I think that statement is slightly flawed, and that's potentially a myth. Men are also emotional, just as emotional as women, but the inability to communicate, that's a different, that's a different conversation. But so firstly, I'd like to state that men are just as emotional, and as I mentioned in the previous response, it's the inability to manage fear. So the fact that they're feeling fear and they need to control a situation demonstrates that they're just as emotional. But there's also, I guess, beliefs, comes back to beliefs around sharing and talking about issues. You might not be a man, or you might not be a strong person, so men find it hard to share. They've got to be macho and strong and so forth. So that definitely leads to, I guess, a lot of pressure building up internally. I guess for the reasons you mentioned, perpetrators of violence, I will probably add to that. I will say that men often perpetrate physical violence, but in terms of looking at domestic violence and family sexual violence, I'm actually gonna say that men and women are perpetrating high levels of domestic violence. And when you look at the Family Protection Act, it's not just physical abuse they're talking about, it's verbal, it's psychological abuse, it's, which includes texts and verbal abuse, all that kind of stuff. And I would say women included, as well as men, society is perpetrating really, really high levels of violence. But in terms of physical, definitely, men are doing it because basically they're bigger than women, so they know that a woman won't or can't respond in that manner. I think it's purely to do with size in terms of the perpetration of physical violence. Otherwise, both of all the other types of violence are being perpetrated. I guess as a life coach myself, life and business coach, on the life coaching side of things, I've had to go through an intense period in my life as a former perpetrator, where I had to, you got to do a lot of soul searching and come back to yourself. I got a whole lot of counseling and coaching to unpack some of these beliefs that I grew up thinking were normal and so forth, growing up in Papua New Guinea, so in an average PNG household. And that's in Port Moresby. Now that's not out in the rural, so I didn't grow up in the village, so I have no idea about living there as a child growing up. But certainly I had to unpack all of my beliefs. So coaching, counseling, meditation, prayer, all of these things help. I do a lot of meditation because it helps still the mind so that the mind can, rationalize and can see itself getting angry. This is something that most people aren't doing because people aren't conscious, people aren't awake. People are just blindly reacting, going through things, thinking that other people, their partners, control their feeling. So in a nutshell, men need to wake up, but how do you do that? Things like going to church, meditation, prayer, exercise, even gardening. When you garden, the mind slows down and you're taking care of flowers and all that kind of stuff, even raising pets and, so forth. That helps. I mean, the prison systems overseas have shown that looking after animals assist with developing a sense of love and care and so forth. Anything that slows the mind down and helps the mind to rationalize and contemplate. I think around the world there's so many, and even here in Papua New Guinea, there's so many examples of that, of men changing. There's so many good role models, and I think change is part of the human journey. So not many people they stay the same. I think a handful of people do, but there's two reasons why someone would change. Either there's been a lot of pain or they've identified pleasure in changing. In my mind, they're the two motivating reasons that someone would change, and Anthony Robbins, world-renowned life coach, talks about it. If a person is getting away with domestic violence, male or female, in this case we're talking about men, if nothing happens to them, they'll keep going until they experience some kind of pain that forces them to give up those beliefs or actions. And then that pain will shift their belief, which in turn will shift their behavior. But until that point, nothing's going to change. Or the other reason is pleasure. If they get some kind of immense benefit from changing. So I think that's one thing that people aren't realizing or talking about, that there's a whole psychology behind changing behavior. And those two things need to be discussed and understood in order for men or anyone to change.